You know, all these events, whether we're talking about Christ's Passover that he's celebrated with his disciples, or the Exodus, going back all the way into the time of Egypt when the children of Israel had all the events that took place that made it possible for them to leave that land of their slavery. You know, all that is a long time ago. But, you know, I want you to notice something and understand something. You know, we are, of course, the people of the book. This book really is a remarkable thing when you think, most of it now in the New Covenant Scriptures were written 1900 years ago approximately. You know, we're working on 2,000 years from this standpoint. And the Old Covenant Scriptures, you know, they go back another 1,500 years, depends upon which particular book. But we're dealing with something that's 3,500 to 2,000 years or so old. That's remarkable in a society that, you know, we don't keep newspapers past, you know, 50 years or something. And our society, you know, many of the young people these days don't even have a clue in this country who Winston Churchill was. You know, they don't know their history. They don't know any of these things. But we are the people of the book, the Holy Bible. And I want you to notice something, because and I want you to listen to this. The biblical narrative is not the past, dead for all but a few fact-obsessed zealots. The biblical narrative is about the past that exists in the present. It is the spiritual memory that guides us between past, present, and future. Without it, we have amnesia and cannot clearly see our way. You know, I took this and adapted the original statement from a historian named Eric Sager. But without this biblical narrative, you know, we cannot see clearly what is coming. And that's the problem of this world. This world does not see what is clearly coming because it cannot see, it cannot move, guiding us between the past to understand the present of what we should be doing with this past and the present and where we're going in the future. This world has spiritual amnesia. But I trust, brethren, you do not have spiritual amnesia. Let's turn to John. Let's go to the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John chapter 15, the Gospel of John chapter 15. We're going to be rehearsing some of these key things that have taken place in the biblical narrative around this Passover season. Some of the key themes that you might have these things in mind, so that you may understand what you should be doing now. You may understand where we are going, because we will understand where we have been. John chapter 15 and verse 12, I'll read this in the New Living Translation. This is my commandment. Love each other the same way I have loved you. There is no greater love, Jesus said, than to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I no longer call you slaves, because a master doesn't confide in his slaves. Now you are my friends, since I have told you everything the Father told me. You didn't choose me, I chose you, and appointed you to go and produce lasting fruit, so that my Father will give you whatever you ask using my name. You are my friends. Yes, now you are my friends, it says here in verse 15. Friends, the word friends here in the Greek text is Strong's 5384. It's philios. You know, the exact spelling here of the conjugation of it in this particular phrase is philion. But it means a friend, of course. And that's the way the New Living translates it, and most of your translations are going to put it that way. It's someone, but what is a friend? Well, the lexicon says it's someone who is dearly loved, someone who is prized in a personal and intimate way. Someone who is dearly loved and prized in a personal, intimate way. A trusted confidant. Someone you share confidences. Someone you share your hopes and dreams with. That you share, a trusted confidant, held dear in a close bond of personal affection. You know, it's an experience-based love. We know here, and we look at this, that we think of how the Bible, how Jesus was using the word of friend, and I think about it from this standpoint. And, you know, in many ways in this world, we have, and like in so many other things, we have degenerated in our use of the understanding of the word friend. You know, we have Facebook where you can friend somebody, you know, and people have, you know, hundreds and hundreds, thousands of friends, you know, or whatever it might be. And you know, really, to be more precise, you know, they're just acquaintances, if that at all. They may not even be acquaintances from that standpoint. But this is not the way the Bible uses the word friend. It's not using it sort of this degenerate 21st century way where it's just, you know, it's whoever your buds are, whoever you know, run into in school, or whoever you run in down at the supermarket, or the 1,001 people on your Facebook page. No, that's not what it means. A friend in the biblical narrative, in the way that Jesus was using it, was someone who was dearly loved, someone who was prized in a very personal and intimate way, a trusted confidant, held dear in a close bond of personal affection. That is what a biblical friend, that's what the meaning of the word friend that Jesus was, and how he was using it. Now, in this particular passage here in John 15, in 12 to verses 12 through 16, you know, many commentators note that Jesus, the way Jesus expresses himself here, especially in verse 13, there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. That Jesus is really calling on a theme that has far more to do with his contemporaneous Greco-Roman culture, that's the greater Greco-Roman culture of the Roman Empire of that time, rather than the more provincial or local Judean culture from that time. Because this aspect of friend and the way that Jesus used it, you are my friends if you do what I command you. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. This was really more of a Greco-Roman ideal from this standpoint, which is kind of surprising from this aspect. We have, for instance, we have in classical history an account by the 1st century, somebody who was very closely contemporaneous with Jesus and his apostles, the Greco-Roman historian Plutarch. And he wrote in his history about Damon and Pythias during the rule of Dionysus. Pythias was condemned to death, and he was about to be executed. He had done something, and Dionysus had condemned him to death. But he wanted to see his family before he died. His friend, Damon, offered himself as a ransom in case he offered himself a ransom so his friend Pythias could go see his family. He said, I'll stand in your place. You know, they went to, I guess they went to Dionysus, or they went to his chief guards and said, look, I will be, you know, I'll be the hostage. I'll stand in his place. You know, in case, you know, so that he can go see his family, and if he doesn't return by the hour of execution, then you can kill me. Wow. That was the friends Damon and Pythias. But as it turned out, returning in time, both of the men were released by the great Dionysus, this particular Greco-Roman ruler of that time, of that era. And he was so impressed that, first of all, that Damon would offer himself. And Pythias would, when he had the chance of just running, no, he wasn't going to leave his friend there. He came back to be executed. And Dionysus was so impressed with this bond of friendship between these two men that he released them. And he came and he called them and he said he wanted to be taken into the secret of such friendship. He was in awe. He was moved. What does Jesus expect from his friends? In the first century Judea, it was common for disciples to attach themselves to a particular rabbi, but not vice versa. But Jesus went out and hand-picked his disciples. He hand-picked them. He hand-selected them. This is very different. This pulling back to just as he says here in John 15:16, you did not choose me, but I chose you. And this was something that was contrary to the way that it typically was done at that time. Now, it was not the way it was done. Now, disciples as Jesus' friends, however, and Jesus didn't use this, that you're my friend so you can do whatever you want. It was not an idle privilege. Rather, being a friend carries with it a solemn responsibility. Because he says in John 15, let's look here, stay with me in John 15, let's look at verse 14. You are my friends if you do what I command. Think about what this meant for the original disciples. You are my friends if you do what I command. Well, it was going to turn their lives upside down. Jesus' friends, that life was never going to be the same again. Once they became a friend of Jesus' friend, everything was going to be different in one way or another. We have, of course, this is my commandment, love each other in the same way I've loved you, verses 12 and 13. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one friend. So it had all sorts of obligations, and it had a remarkable effect on each of those 12 men in one way or another. In the Old Covenant, only Abraham and Moses are either explicitly or implicitly referred to as the friends of God. Let's look just a moment here. Let's take a look. Because Jesus, obviously, when he was taking some of these things, he wasn't just pulling it necessarily from the Greco-Roman world around them. He saw how they had this ideal of friendship, as I was saying, about Damon and Pythias. How they had this idea, they were so close that their lives were interchangeable from that standpoint. But Jesus had a relationship. He knew something about these friends of God, didn't he? Yes, he did. If we go, let's go to Exodus chapter 33, and we're going to take a look here at some of the friends of God and what this meant. What it meant to be a friend of God. Exodus chapter 33. Good place to go this time of year. And verse 7. Exodus 33 and verse 7. Now this happened, we're breaking in the middle of the context. This was right after the sin of the golden calf incident, where the people, of course, had, God was quite upset with them. He was very upset with them, as you can imagine. And Moses had to make some changes. He had to move the tabernacle of meeting from in the camp to outside the camp, because God is holy. Anyways, and we see here in Exodus chapter 33 and verse 7, and I'm going to read in the Coulter version. And Moses took the tent, this tabernacle of meeting, and pitched it on the outside of the camp, afar off from the camp, and called it the tent of meeting. And it came to pass, everyone who sought the Lord went out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. And it came to pass, as Moses went out to the tent, all the people rose up, and each man stood at his tent door, and gazed at Moses until he had gone to the tent. And it came to pass, as Moses went into the tent, the cloudy pillar descended and stood at the door of the tent, and the Lord spoke with Moses. And all the people saw the cloudy pillar stand at the tent door. And all the people rose up and worshipped, each man at his tent door. And the Lord would speak. The Lord, this is the YHVH, Yahweh. Or, I'm just guessing, of course, how to pronounce that. We don't really know. The great I Am, who had appeared to Moses initially there in the bush. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. And he returned again to the camp. So here we have this implicit reference of Moses being God's friend. Now let's go to Numbers 12. So God was talking with Moses. He would talk to him very intimately, very closely. He didn't just talk to him in a dream. We're going to see that had a different. There was a point to this. Numbers chapter 12. Numbers chapter 12. We have this whole incident that occurs here because some people did not understand that it was dangerous to speak against someone who was a friend of God. Yet it was actually dangerous to speak to someone who was, negatively, to run down someone who is a friend of God. God didn't take it lightly. We're going to see this in Numbers chapter 12 and in verse 1. And Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had taken, for he had taken a Cushite woman. Moses had he'd taken a woman. This would have been a woman from what we would call Sudan these days, who was the origin of Sudan, as his wife. And Miriam and Aaron had been complaining about this woman that he had taken as a wife. And they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? And has he not also spoken by us? And the Lord heard it. Now, he listens to our gossip. He listens to our whining, our whinging, our complaining. That's something to sometimes think about. I mean, sometimes I will complain or something like this. Maybe you do a bit of complaining too from time to time about something. Well, God hears it. Anyways, and the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very meek, more than all the men on the face of the earth. And the Lord spoke suddenly to Moses and to Aaron and to Miriam. You three come out to the tabernacle of the congregation. And the three came out. And the Lord came down in the pillar of the cloud and stood in the door of the tabernacle and called Aaron and Miriam. And they both came forward. And he said, hear now my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known to him in a vision and will speak to him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. No, God didn't do this. He was his friend. God considered him faithful. If God considers you faithful, that's about as high a compliment as you can get. From this aspect. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. And I will speak with him mouth to mouth, even clearly, and not in dark speeches. And he shall behold the likeness of the Lord. Yeah, he even saw the likeness, God's likeness. You think about that. God was willing to reveal that to him. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? Why weren't you afraid to speak against my friend? And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. And the cloud moved from the tabernacle, and behold, Miriam became leprous as snow. And Aaron looked on Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said to Moses, O my Lord, I beg you, do not lay upon do not lay upon us the sin which we have done foolishly, and in which we have sinned. Yes, complaining about this woman, running Moses down from this standpoint, bad mistake, a sin even, a sin. Let her not be like one dead, of whom the flesh is half gone, when he comes out from his mother's womb. And Moses cried to the Lord, saying, Heal her now, O God, I beseech you. And the Lord said to Moses, If her father had but spit in her face, should she not be ashamed 7 days? Let her be shut out from the camp 7 days, and afterward let her be received. And Miriam was shut out of the camp 7 days, and the people did not journey until Miriam was brought in. Of course, Miriam was Moses' sister. Miriam was the big sister who sat there on the banks of the Nile River while Moses was in this basket of bulrushes that they'd pushed out in the river because they had been scared that he would be just cast in the river and drowned, because the Egyptians, the Pharaoh and the Egyptian rulers had passed a decree that they should have a form of abortion or infanticide from this standpoint and kill all the boy babies of Israel. But Miriam was tasked with by her mother to see if she could do something to keep an eye on him, because I guess the mom would go out there in the bulrushes and put the basket out and hoping that it would either be safe and she'd come in for it in the evening or whatever, because maybe they were being searched that day. We know because of that whole story, of course, that Moses was found by the daughter of Pharaoh and had all that of experience. But this is that Miriam. But she was a remarkable woman from this standpoint. And God considered her. She was in a high position of leadership in Israel. But she and Aaron had spoken against Moses because of the wife he picked, because she was a Cushite. As a different ethnic group. God wasn't happy when they had criticized his friend. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 30. There are a lot of people these days, this is ignorant people, I guess is the best I can term them, in various Christian denominations who really run Moses down these days. But anyways, in Deuteronomy 34:10, that's actually dangerous ground to be on, to be doing that. Deuteronomy 34:10, in the very close of the Torah, after Moses had died, there was this editorial comment that was written probably by Samuel at some point in time later on. And there has not arisen a prophet like Moses since then in Israel, in whom the Lord knew face to face. Yeah, God knew him face to face. He would face-to-face talk with the Lord. So this was quite the experience. In the books that he mediated, that he brought to us and he wrote for us, they're a remarkable treasure that he has left for us. There are those these days who speak against Moses amongst the churches of God. There's some of those, and they run him down. But that was, I think they're falling into a worse pitfall than Miriam and Aaron. Just speaking against them because they didn't like the color of the woman that he married. Anyways, Moses was one. He was an implicit friend of God, okay? Because we don't have in the scripture saying that Moses was a friend of God. No, but we have that God himself said he spoke to him as, from face to face as a friend. Just as you would do this, so for you to understand that. But there is another one in the Old Covenant scriptures who was an explicit friend of God. Let's go to Genesis. Back to the very beginning here, beginning chapters. Genesis chapter 22. Genesis chapter 22. And we'll start with verse 1. And it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham. Okay, you notice something here right immediately. God tested Abraham. There's some people who hate the idea that God will test those who are closest to him. They hate the concept, even that is to think about it. I mean, I'm talking about people in the church who consider themselves members of the Church of God, who hate this concept that came to pass that after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. He said, take now your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go into the land of Moriah and offer him for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell you. Let's go down here, verse 6. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son. And he took the fire pot in his hand and a knife, and they both went together. Because they were carrying, of course, the fire in a pot. I mean, people didn't have matches in those days. They didn't have flint and steel, this sort of thing. But they would have had a fire going, and they would have kept the coals in the fire pot, a ceramic jar, and they would have carried this around, and that's how you took your fire along with you in the fire pot. Verse 7, and Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, my father, and said, here am I, my son. And he said, behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said, my son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they both went on together. And all that time that they went on, walking up Mount Moriah, Isaac was doing some thinking. As you could well imagine, he was thinking over what his dad had said to him. He was thinking over what he knew of his entire life. And they came to the place of which God had told them. And Abraham built an altar there, and laid the wood in order. And he bound his son Isaac, and laid him on the wood upon the altar. He obviously asked him to turn around, and he bound him. But I think Isaac had caught on what was going on at that point in time. But he didn't resist. He didn't resist. He knew the story. He knew his father. And verse 10, and Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son, and the angel of the Lord called to him from the heavens and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here I am. And he said, do not lay your hand upon the lad, nor do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked. And behold, behind him a ram was entangled in a thicket by its horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of the place, the Lord will provide. So that is what is said until today, in the mount of the Lord it will be provided. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham out of heaven the second time, and said, by myself have I sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this thing, and have not withheld your son, your only son, that in blessing I will bless you, and in multiplying I will multiply your seed like the stars of heaven and the sand that is upon the seashore. And he goes on, and in verse 18, and in your seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. It's a remarkable story. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. Was God the Father there also, along with the word Yahweh, okay, the ever-living one, the one who had stood on top of of Mount Sinai, because he wasn't the one who became known as the father. Were they both there watching Abraham? They'd both made a covenant with him. They'd both walked through the pieces in the covenant of the pieces that is recorded there in Genesis. Was he watching? Did Isaac play along with this? Willingly offer his own life, lay down his life for this goal, this dream, according to this relationship with God that his father was establishing? Let's go to 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles chapter 20. And verse 7. 2 Chronicles chapter 20 and verse 7. Now, here in 2 Chronicles, you come up with, I'm breaking into the middle of the context of this. You had before here, you had talking about all the nations of the world. And, of course, Israel at this point in time, or Judah at this point in time, was under certain threats. But it says here in verse 7, okay, in the appeal to God, it was Jehoshaphat who was speaking. And he was talking, "Are you not our God? Did you not drive out the people of this land before Israel and give it to the seed of your friend Abraham forever?" At a time when they were under national threat, the king of the country, Jehoshaphat, got there, and he in his prayer that he was calling out to God, asking him to remember that it was that God gave them the land. He gave it to who? To the seed of your friend Abraham, who had been so willing that, and had manifested this, that played out this, as it were, this theme that there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friend. That had been played out so many centuries before on Mount Moriah. And we have this here in this reference here very clearly in 2 Chronicles 27, that the Bible is referring to your friend Abraham, your friend Abraham. And this is also the prophets. If we go to Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah 20, Isaiah 41 and verse 8, I'll just read it here in the New Living Translation. "But as for you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, my chosen one, descended from Abraham, my friend." Descended from that time there that God had made that promise. He had sworn by himself that he was going to bless them. And he was going to bless them as the sand of the sea, as it were. Descended from Abraham, my friend. It was God's friend. This is a key role. It's amazing how this plays. It was a theme that right from the beginning of Genesis is sort of, I sometimes wonder if God went through this and said, yes, this is the kind of person I want as my friend. Because he has the wherewithal to do what we have to do, my father and myself, that we have to do this ourselves. He understands spiritually where we're going and what is needed to be done. We go to James. James was the brother or half-brother of Jesus in the general epistles. He had been the bishop of Jerusalem, or the leading elder there in Jerusalem, until just before when the temple was destroyed. James chapter 2. And verse 14. I want to read this, because again, we're going to be talking, it's a key theme that the Bible used. It's a remarkably important theme. James chapter 2 and verse 14. James breaks, I'm breaking into his chapter here. James is writing, "My brethren, what good does it do if anyone says he has faith and does not have works? Is faith able to save him?" Okay, this is a very controversial question. There are a lot of evangelical Protestants who think, yeah, well, that's right, faith is able to save them without any works, because they have the sola fides. This is something that Martin Luther launched the Protestant Reformation with, okay? This was one of his, he had one of his booklets that he came out with, and he talked about, this is one of his major theological points that he liked to push. Of course, he hated the Epistle of James. And he called it the epistle of straw and this, that, and the other. Martin Luther was quite the character. Again, but should he have been speaking in such a way about the, half-brother of Jesus, one of the original leaders of the Church of God? Or what should we be listening to James instead of Martin Luther? Well, that's an idea. Some people find that a little hard. They prefer Martin Luther. It seems to fit their theology better. But anyways, in James chapter 2 and in verse 14, "My brethren, what good does it do if anyone says he has faith and does not have works? Is his faith able to save him? Now then, if there be a brother or a sister that is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you say to them, go and be filled and warmed, and does not give them the things necessary for the body, what good is it? In the same way also, faith, if it does not have works, is dead by itself. But someone is going to say, you have faith and I have works. My answer is, you prove your faith to me through your works, and I will prove my faith to you through my works. Do you believe that God is one? You do well to believe this, but even the demons believe and tremble in fear. But are you willing to understand, O foolish man, that faith without works is dead? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up Isaac, his own son, upon the altar? Yeah, he's asking, do you not see that faith was working together with his works, and by works his faith was perfected? And the scripture was fulfilled, which says, now Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him for righteousness, and he was called a friend of God. He was called a friend of God. This was a crucial incident, and in fact, God used it, even in this commentary of the Apostle James, to discuss something. The attitude of sacrifice, the willingness to act on your faith, something that is that we have to pay attention to right now and at this time. We need to consider these things and think about it. Now let's go to John, the Gospel of John, John chapter 8, because I want to show you something here, John chapter 8, verse 31. John chapter 8 and verse 31. Therefore Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, if you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Okay, if you continue in my word, okay, then you're my disciples. This willingness to continue on, this willingness to work with God, to work with Jesus, to be harmonious with him, and to follow what he was teaching, that this would allow them to know the truth, and this truth was going to set them free from sin and death. But those he was talking with or arguing with in this case, verse 33, they answered him, we are Abraham's seed and have never been in bondage to anyone. What do you mean, saying we shall become truly free? And Jesus answered them, truly, truly, I tell you, everyone who practices sin is a servant of sin. We cannot forget this. If we practice sin, we're the servant of sin. We're not being the servants of God. Verse 35, and he makes this point. And the servant does not live in the house forever, but the Son lives forever. Therefore, if the Son shall set you free, you shall be truly free. I know you are Abraham's seed, but you are seeking to kill me, because my words haven't entered into your minds. I speak the things that I have seen from my Father, and you do the things you've seen from your father. And they answered and said to him, Our father is Abraham. And Jesus said to them, If you were Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham. Yes, if you were Abraham's children, you'd show the same type of works. You'd show like the work that Abraham did, that there is no greater love than a man should lay down his life for his friends, that a willingness to sacrifice whatever, even the most dear. But anyways, they go on and they're arguing with them. But in verse 42, Jesus said to them, If God were your Father, and you would love me, for I came forth and from God, for I have not come of myself, but he sent me. Verse 43, And why don't you understand my speech? Because you cannot hear my words. And he goes on to point out where their spiritual influence was, and it wasn't godly. In verse 45, But because I speak the truth, you do not believe me. Yes, those that are not of the household of faith don't hear the truth. And he goes on and argues with them some more. But at the very end here, in verse 55, jumping to the end, Yet you have not known him. Jesus is making the point. You're not intimate. You're not an intimate friend with God. But I know him. And if I say that I do not know him, I would be a liar like you. But I know him and I keep his word. Okay, I know him and I do keep his word. I keep his instructions. Abraham, your father, was overjoyed to see my day. And he saw it and rejoiced. He saw it and rejoiced because Yahweh, the Lord, he came and he would eat with them. He would talk with them. We have, a couple instances that are recorded in the Bible, but there were more, I'm sure. In verse 57, the Jews said to him, You're not even 50 years old. Have you seen Abraham? And Jesus said to them, Truly, truly, I tell you, before Abraham was born, I am. And he made this specific point, that he was there. He saw what Abraham had done with Isaac there at Mount Moriah. Of course, they were willing to kill him for that, because they couldn't accept it. But it's very clear for us that God makes this point in Galatians, and the Apostle Paul, Galatians 3:29, if you are Christ, then you're Abraham's seeds and heirs according to the promise. All that promise of the future, of what's going to go forth. Because, your descendants, you are the spiritual descendants. You're the spiritual inheritors of this friendship with God, that God called you friends. If we go to John, a little bit, turn one chapter over here to John chapter 10 and verse 11. Jesus said this to his disciples. In making the statement about himself, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Again, it's this theme of being willing, that there's no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. Let's drop down here to verse 14. Verse 14, I am the good shepherd, and I know those who are mine, and am known of those who are mine. Just as the Father knows me, I also know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring those also, and they shall hear my voice. And there shall be one flock and one shepherd. On account of this, the Father loves me. Why does he love him? Why does Jesus says, because I laid down my life that I may receive it back again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to receive it back again. This commandment I have received from my Father. Jesus stood out and it stands out, of course, in the scriptures of having this willingness to lay down his life. And he said he was willing to, that no greater love can a man have than to lay it down for one's friends. And you are my friends, he's saying, if we're willing to do what he commands us. He was willing to do this for us. Let's go to Matthew chapter 11. Matthew chapter 11 and verse 25. Matthew 11 verse 25. And here he was getting a little irritated, and he was disappointed by those who had seen his miracles, and yet they hadn't repented. And in verse 25, at that time Jesus answered and said, I praise you, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and intelligent and have revealed them to babes. Yes, Father, for it is well-pleasing in your sight to do this. All things were delivered to me, he testifies, by my Father. And no one knows the Son except the Father. Neither does anyone know the Father except the Son, and the one to whom the Son personally chooses to reveal him. And that's you. God has chosen you as his prized friend, his dearly loved friend, and he's chosen to reveal him to you. He's chosen that we might understand and come to know God and all the things in the nature of what he wants us to be and to do, and what he wants us to do tomorrow in our lives. Let's go to Hebrews, the book of Hebrews. And we'll go to Hebrews chapter 2. Hebrews 2. And we'll start with verse 17. We should always consider the nature of the one who has called us to be his friend. He has a strong motivation, but it is a high honor and a distinct privilege to be called one of Jesus' friends. In verse 17 here, in verse chapter 2 of the book of Hebrews, for this reason it was obligatory to him to be made like all his brethren in everything, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, in order to make a propitiation for the sins of the people. Jesus was willing to become flesh. He was willing to be made, as we're going to read on, as just a normal, mortal human being, that he might share this existence and be able to have a closer relationship with us who are human beings, who have a birth. We're physical beings. And for God to relate to that and to relate to us, he had to experience himself. In verse 18, for because he himself has suffered, having been tempted in like manner, he is able to help those who are being tempted. Chapter 3. Because of this, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling, or sharers of the heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of the faith we profess, Jesus Christ, who is faithful to him who appointed him, even as Moses was in all his house. For he has been counted worthy of greater glory than Moses, even as he who built the house has so much more honor than the house itself. Moses was of the house. He was the friend of God. And God was even angry when his brother and sister would speak against him. For every house is built by someone, but he who built all things is God. Now, on the one hand, Moses was faithful in all of his house as a ministering servant, for a testimony of those things which were going to be spoken afterwards. But on the other hand, Christ was faithful as a son over his own house. Whose house are we, if we truly holding fast the confidence and rejoicing of the hope firm until the end? And in verse 14, here, just drop down here to verse 14, for we are companions of Christ. That is, we are sharers. We are active partakers of Christ if we truly hold the confidence that we've had at the beginning steadfast until the end. Jesus said to us, and he said to all of his disciples in John 15:12, this is my commandment. Love each other the same way I've loved you. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you slaves because the master doesn't confide in his slaves. Now I've called you my friends since I've told you everything the Father told me. He's revealed these things. He's opened these things up to us. You didn't choose me, I chose you. I appointed you to go and produce lasting fruit, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask using my name. The biblical narrative is not the past, dead for all but a few fact-obsessed zealots. This biblical narrative is about the past that exists in the present. It is the spiritual memory that has been guiding us clearly into an eternity with the one who picked us out and now calls us his dearly loved friends.